Hey there, my name's Card, and as long as I can remember, I've always really liked poetry. I enjoy reading it, I enjoy analysing it, and nowadays I even have a go at writing a bit of it myself every now and then. Whenever I'm discussing poetry with people, I've noticed that inevitably, and usually pretty quickly, they'll bring up Rupi Kaur, and unfortunately, it's usually just to attack her and her work without putting much thought into how and why it became so popular in the first place. So, what I'd like to do here is just really briefly articulate why that is, if only so that next time the topic comes up, I'll have something to refer back to for my own sake. If you end up listening to this, one way or another, you most likely already know who Rupi Kaur is. But, just in case you don't, Kaur is a young female Indian Canadian poet who grew a modest following posting her work to Instagram, but shot to the top of bestseller lists everywhere, basically overnight, with a self published book of poems in 2015. And here's the thing, all of her poems are incredibly simple. The average Kaur poem is about a dozen words, broken into around 4 lines. Not really any rhyme scheme or punctuation, not necessarily a great deal of subtext, and to boot, they're even typeset about as simplistically as possible too. Usually 12 point Times New Roman on a blank background levels of simple. This short form free verse stuff of hers has been extremely popular in recent years with a certain type of poetry aficionado on websites like Instagram and Tumblr. But Kaur's debut book, Milk and Honey, attracted just as much of a rabid anti fan base that have spent the years since basically just trying to tear her down. I think it's really unfortunate that a lot of people feel the need to jump onto the bandwagon of hating this stuff. Further still, I see a lot of people have this knee jerk reaction to her work and then immediately declare that people like Kaur are ruining the modern poetry scene, and that everyone who's ever bought her book is just some vapid consumer who doesn't know what open quote real poetry is. People really jump the gun on this sort of thing without bothering to find out the story behind how and why she got so popular. Firstly, Kaur had been writing and performing poetry since at least 2009, and she's got plenty of experience in the medium, and probably a lot more of it than most of the internet gatekeepers that dismiss her without a second thought. That being said, her initial following was pretty small, and it stayed that way for years, basically just growing by word of mouth. Then, in 2015, Kaur posted a series of personal images on Instagram, artfully depicting menstrual bloodstains on her clothing as part of an attempt to destigmatize women's health issues. A handful of online trolls harassed her over the pictures and eventually used mass false reporting to get them taken down, alleging an Instagram Terms of Service violation. Kaur then basically penned an open letter calling the trolls' actions out. Instagram apologized and reversed the mistaken takedown, and the company's response itself went viral shortly thereafter. That's what first brought Kaur online attention, an attempt by some anonymous trolls to censor her, of all things. Once that had happened, an online audience came snowballing in. Her stuff got picked up algorithmically, and that in turn just brought in bigger and bigger crowds. The same went for her Milk and Honey collection of poetry shortly after. Once sales properly took off, that momentum only carried them further and further until it eventually spent more than a straight year at the top of the New York Times bestsellers list. Now, the self published 20 something was the world's most popular living poet. Knowing this, I can't help but feel that almost every negative comment you see about her online is either some bitter crabs in a bucket style resentment of her commercial success, or someone just looking to attack a popular figure knowing that there might not be a lot of backlash on themselves. And especially with the latter, you can't help but think that a lot of the people who want to tear her down because she's A, non-white, and B, a woman, might just be mad that a brown girl's made it as a writer and they haven't. Call me an SJW or something in the comments all you want. I don't care, and you know I'm right. Personally, I don't think that someone like Charles Bukowski is anything worth writing home about either. But all the elitist poetry incels love his trite free verse for some reason. It would be nice if people stopped dogpiling on her work unnecessarily at every turn. If you happen to go anywhere online that discusses poetry, I promise you that as soon as Kaur's name gets brought up, people just won't hesitate to openly call her poetry trash. Now, personally, I will say that admittedly I'm not a huge fan of her style. I'm not one of those online LARPers who pretends to love all the classics and revere the poetic canon, but I do prefer stuff that's a bit more long form, or rhymes, or tells more of a typical story. Plus, the way I see it, Rupi Kaur has done more to get people into reading and writing poetry than just about anyone else in living memory, and I, for one, will welcome that. I don't think it's anyone's job to try and decide what is and is not real poetry, and if people are reading Kaur's stuff and enjoying it or getting something worthwhile for themselves out of it, I'm happy for them, and I'm happy that they're enjoying literature. Remember, there's nothing inherently better about older poetry just because it's older or it conforms to some arbitrary standards made up hundreds of years ago. And frankly, shame on anyone who aspires towards a creative career of their own, but tears down another artist for quote unquote undeserved success. At the end of the day, who does and doesn't make it as a writer in this commercialized world is basically just luck and happenstance. And I choose to be happy for anyone who does manage to break through. Incidentally, there'll also be a link in the description to a novella I wrote that I'm very proud of and want to share and I think will be worth your while checking out. Well, that's just been my 2 cents on the matter. Thanks for listening. My name's Card. This has been Card Posting. Feel free to subscribe if you want. And either way, bye for now, and have a lovely day.